Welcome to this edition of the Website Business Broker Specialist. I'm David Fairley, President and Founder of WebsiteProperties.com. Today I want to talk about the topic of how much owner financing should a seller consider when selling their website business. As we all know, 2008 brought us on a major global financial crisis whereby money became quite scarce and lending institutions stopped providing business loans for small businesses to a large degree, and it kind of screeched to a halt. Tightening credit markets, tightening credit cards, everything. So for small business transactions, it's become quite difficult to raise finances to purchase businesses, and especially internet businesses, which have been difficult in the past anyway because they're virtual assets, and banks haven't quite figured out that internet companies are just as viable as brick and mortars, even though we have Amazon.com and eBay's and Google's and such. But anyway, what's the type of deals that are transpiring these days often have a component of owner financing in it. So the question is, what kind of terms and conditions should a seller undertake in order to consider some owner financing? I'll start off by looking at the advantages to a buyer, and why would a buyer actually want to use owner financing rather than traditional financing or paying cash. Firstly, there are several reasons why a buyer finds owner financing attractive. The first one is that it offers flexibility and is a lot easier to set up than a traditional financing, which can take 2 to 3 months, especially through an SBA loan with a lot of hoops to jump through and fees and whatnot. So it's a lot cheaper and quicker to do it that route. Secondly, buyers often feel that it's important for the seller to keep some skin in the game, have something, have some risk going forward. If they have the confidence, they feel that if they're willing to carry a note, an owner note, that this exudes confidence in the business's future success, and that brings more comfort to a lot of buyers. It also allows a buyer, typically is going to get a better interest rate from private finance owner financing than they would from a bank. Traditional financing could be around 8 to 10% for secured small business loan, whereas a seller might offer a more competitive interest rate of 6%, which is still better than what they're going to get in the bank account after the fact. So that's a great savings and a good incentive for a buyer. The other major point is it requires less capital for the buyer. He can use less money and get some leverage with the money he has to buy a larger business, and he gets a better bang for his buck, essentially. So that's one of the major incentives to finance some debt when they're purchasing an internet business. Now, from the seller's point of view, the advantages are several. Typically, when there's owner financing involved, the price, the asking price is typically, or the offer price is typically higher than an all-cash deal. Commonly, you will get a seller will get close to or at their asking price if they're willing to provide some owner financing, which in the end is going to gross them more money in the long run. There's also some tax advantages. Not getting one lump sum at once where you're going to get dinged in that following tax year. You get to spread your tax liabilities over several years potentially, and in some cases save taxes, more taxes than you would if you got it all at once. And one more reason that is certainly compelling for some sellers is that they get a lump sum chunk at the closing, and then they have monthly payments or quarterly payments for several years following the transaction, which for some people is comforting because a lot of times sellers experience sort of the tap turning off and get a little bit frustrated when there's just money going out the door rather than coming in. So having monthly or quarterly payments after they've sold the business is a nice way to have some continuance with your cash flows into the future. The biggest issue with owner financing is what percentage of the asking price the seller carry. from our experience, most sellers are typically comfortable with anywhere from 10 to 35%, depending on their their personalities typically, and of course depending on the asking price. But that's usually the range. Buyers, on the other hand, will try and get as much owner finance as they can, and usually like to see anywhere from 25. Excuse me. Cancel that. They will typically be requesting more like 25 to 50%, again, to get more leverage out of the deal. And of course, it's a negotiation from that point. Another one of the major issues is going to be considered is, well, what's the buyer's experience? What are they bringing to the table? If a seller is going to sell their business, they want to be assured that the buyer is competent. Not only is he competent, but if he's going to be making payments into the future for 2 or 3 years or longer, you want to make sure that they're going to be able to make those payments. So looking at the buyer's experience in business or online is going to be lending a degree of comfort to the seller as to how much financing they're willing to offer for that particular buyer. Obviously, the interest rate is going to be another factor. The more interest the buyer is willing to offer, the more incentive the seller is going to have to carry a larger note and for a longer term. It may be a great long-term investment that nets the seller more money in the long run if they get a really attractive interest rate that is going to let their money work for them after the sale. The length of the term is usually an important issue. Most of our sellers don't like to go beyond 2 or 3 years, and most buyers like to get 3 to 5 years. So typically we end up in the middle somewhere around a term of 3 years, which is typically a good compromise. Sometimes the payments can be smaller with a lump sum payment at the end, a balloon payment, and other times it's just equal payments for the length of the term. But the shorter the term is going to be typically more attractive to a seller, so they're out of the picture. Again, depending on the interest rate and other terms involved and the caliber of the buyer, that will determine how far a seller will agree to. One of the other major issue is the cash flow, how much the business is throwing off in cash flow. It doesn't make a lot of sense for someone to sell a business and then take on a lot of owner financing if they're making a lot of money every month. The deal, typically a successful deal means that they're getting paid close to their asking price, and they're financing at a solid rate, and they're getting paid monthly rather than quarterly or annually. That's going to be more of an incentive for a seller to take that. They have to get enough money at close, though, to counterbalance the cash flow that they might be getting monthly for them to have the incentive to sell. So those are pretty critical and key points that sellers are going to be looking for. So as a rule of thumb, a solid owner finance deal would be selling price at close to or at asking price, at above average interest rate, to a qualified and experienced buyer for a shorter term with a possible balloon payment and monthly payments, and on average around a 25% selling price. That's it for this edition of Website Business Broker Specialist. I'm David Fairley. Please come and visit us at websiteproperties.com to view some quality websites for sale.